Sometimes you don't start a migration because it's on the roadmap. You start it because everything is broken right now. IBM's Slack workspace was growing so fast that just the daily login pushed the system past its limits. So today, I talked with Maude Lemaire about what they did next. Maude's now a principal engineer at GitHub, but the story comes from earlier in her career, when she was just 2 years out of college, and she was handed the job of fixing IBM's performance problems as part of the enterprise performance team. And she made incredible decisions under pressure. She did targeted refactors, sanity checked the data model in production, and simplified core systems, finding durable fixes for real pain. It's an amazing story and an even more amazing start to Maude's career. Today on Tern Stories, I have Maude Lemaire here with me. Maude and I first met at Slack, where she was an engineer for 8 years.
Almost. I didn't quite make it to 8.
Almost 8 years, and is now a principal engineer at GitHub. Before that, she was a engineer at Runway, and she is the author of the book Refactoring at Scale. So I am extremely excited to have you here. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So we're going to talk about a Vitesse migration and all of the wonderful hair that comes with that. I wanted to talk a little bit about, because you've been at Slack for so long and seen sort of this like wild growth that happened. How did you find Slack in 2016? It was not a household name at that point. Like who did you meet, and then how did you land there?
So Slack, I started using very briefly, about like a year after public launch, I think.
It was early.
Timeline wise, it was early, because I was still in university at that point, and everyone sort of obsessively read Hacker News, except me. I still don't obsessively read it, but
That's
I guess
fine, I think.
yeah, I can still clearly do my job and exist in this world without reading Hacker News. So I continue to not really.
Yeah, arguably
But at
better.
the time,
That's fair.
yeah, that's a whole different worm, can of worms. But basically, everyone I went to school with was like reading Hacker News and like trying out all the like cool new stuff that was announced on Hacker News, and that meant like, ooh, like Slack public launch or whatever. Like, let's try it for the computer science undergraduate society that I was on. And so we like dabbled in it. It didn't really stick, but it like seemed cool. And when I went to Run the Runway after graduation, we were using HipChat, and I despised it with a deep, deep level of that there's no what is the noun version of despise?
Just despicable. I don't
I don't
know.
know. I didn't like it. It made me upset. And who was I talking to at the time? Someone else I was talking to at the time who was also working at like a smallish company, and they were using Slack, and they thought it was a much superior product. I was on a like very highly paged rotation for front end stuff at Rent the Runway, which meant that I had to do a lot of things in HipChat, um, particularly after hours. Yes. And so like that just like made things so much worse, especially when like things didn't load for some unknown reason.
As they do.
And yeah, and about a year-ish into that job, I decided for many reasons to leave. But one of those reasons was because I was in an absurdly long distance relationship with my then boyfriend, now husband, where I was living in New York and working at Rent the Runway. He was living in Seattle working at Microsoft. So that's like a not great situation to be in. And we were like, let's both quit our jobs and move to San Francisco and do the programmer thing. And so I started looking for jobs in San Francisco, and I was like, ooh, Slack is shiny. And it's this cool tool that like seems like maybe it would be a fun fit, and it's like not too big, which is, I was also looking for a company that was not, I didn't want to go from like Rent the Runway size, which was maybe like sub 100 engineers for sure, like maybe like 50-ish, to like a Google. Like I didn't want that. And so that like narrowed the pool a little bit. And I initially got form letter rejected. Did I tell you this story?
No.
Oh
you got a
yeah.
full letter rejected from Slack?
I got form
Idiots.
letter rejected.
I mean, clearly it didn't stick.
Clearly it did not stick. So mostly at Breath Runner, I was doing mostly front end stuff, and I wanted to move into more of a back end role. And I'd started doing that at my job, but I wanted my next job to be more back endy. And I'd done a first round of like applying to various jobs in a back endy role, but I had a very front end, like a 1 year out of college front end resume, right? Like,
Right.
not even when the market was like good, it's hit or miss, right? Um, and so I decided, okay, I'm going to start applying to front end roles instead. And so I applied to a front end role that I saw at Slack, and I was like, oh, like maybe I'll be a good fit. Um, and yeah, I got a form letter rejected like 3 days later, among with like 3 other form letter rejections. I was like looking through, I think, Angel List for jobs at the time. It's now named something else. But you could have like good filtering on size of company and stuff. And at that point, I was like, I don't understand. Like, is it my resume? Like, what's going on? Why am I getting all these form letter rejections? Like, I'm not even getting to a recruiter call. Like, I know I'm like not that bad.
Yeah,
Please,
but at least worth a call at that point in your career.
at least worth a call. Thank you.
And Rent the Runway is not some garbage little startup, but even at that point is, a name that some people know.
Some people certainly. I think what I wonder if like the had I applied more in New York and stayed in New York, that might have held more weight. And I was trying to do the like move across the coast thing. I don't know. I don't know. But I ended up sending an email to Camille Fournier, who had been CTO during my first part of my tenure at Slack, and who had been excited to hire me. And I reached out to her and I was like, look, like, if you have a minute, please. I don't know what it is. Is it my resume? Like, what's going on? I'm just like trying to find a job that I'll be a good fit for and like move to San Francisco. And I think my email was like, it was too long, to be quite honest. It was like very rambly. And she responded with 2 words, which was intros incoming.
Bless her.
And one of those intros was to Julia Grace, who was leading the infrastructure team at Slack at the time. And she saw that I had been form letter rejected. And she sent me this email. And she was like, I am so sorry. We form letter rejected you. Like, would you still like to give it another go? I was like, yeah, like I really would. And then I went through the whole interview process, and it was between a job at Slack and a job at Twitter. And I took the job at Slack.
That seems that's amazing, first of all. And Julia is amazing. So I no doubt that you both made the right choice there. What did Okay, so you show up at Slack. It's now a year post launch, maybe a year plus a month of interview kerfuffle. What did Slack look like? What was the tech stack there that you had walked into?
A lot of just PHP everywhere. Just like a lot of PHP and like some files that were like thousands of lines long. Yeah. libchat.php. Shout out to libchat.php. That file was
Thousands of lines of PHP.
5,000 to 6,000 lines long of just PHP, just like, and really like defensively written PHP, right? Like, because there was no type annotations for anything. And so it was like, if this stuff I got in is like total garbage, let's see what kind of garbage it is, right? Like, is it a null? Is it a zero? Is it a false? Is it like
Wild.
an empty array? Because also everything's arrays. And so every single function essentially had these like checks and these like log errors if you reach this sort of point and it's the wrong combination of things. And then you do your best to do the thing that you were supposed to do in that function, and you return it. And it was all like very like procedural, right? Like there was no like object oriented anything. It was truly just like a 5,000 to 6,000 line long PHP file with just like function, name of function, and some stuff in it.
It is wild to hear that is the like developer experience of showing up at Slack, especially given, as you said, the product experience of Slack is just 180 degrees different from that.
Oh yes. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Like 100%. But I think it's not. What was really interesting is that like I think my personal experience going into it, especially coming from like a very like Java centric backend world, was that if you just did like a command F, you could find things.
That makes a ton of sense. Like, that's easy to explore.
It's easy to explore. The naming was like actually not that bad. The naming patterns of like, oh, like this functions in like this file because it starts with that name, right? Like lib chat format, it has
Yeah,
all the functions named chat format, blah, blah, blah. And like from that name, you can probably figure out what they do. And so it was like pretty easy to like trace your way through things. Um, it wasn't necessarily easy to make decisions, like step back and make decisions about the whole ball. But if you were like tasked with like, oh, there's this weird bug, go fix the bug, it was like, okay, well, like let me just like trace through and like figure out like which null check got omitted. Because inevitably it was like at some point it becomes null for some reason. And then we
yeah,
just try to spew it back out. It's like, okay, where does that happen? Okay, it's here. We forgot the null check here. Like, ideally, add a test. See how you're feeling about adding a test, and then like push the fix and go. And so I think it like made for very like quick iteration early
mhm,
on, which I associate with like the quality of the product, the fact that like people really cared deeply about how good the product experience was. And you had this like really fast development cycle. And so like you could make a PR, merge it, deploy it to click the deploy button, which deployed it to 100% of production within like 30 seconds or something absurd. And then see it for yourself too. Like, oh, I fixed the bug. Like my Slack doesn't do the thing anymore. Um, I mean, the whole like deploy to 100% of production within 30 seconds is a little scary. And even the most well-intentioned changes that are reviewed by the most senior people sometimes um, don't go so well. Yeah.
indeed. I I joined Slack about 2 weeks after we decided to not do that, and in no small part
Oh,
because Slack
right.
decided to not do this anymore. I was part of a group of people that showed up and were asked to think about how to fix that, in addition to, of course, everyone else who worked there. But that wasn't for several years after the point we're talking about.
Yeah, this is like all 2 years later.
Yeah, you can live in that state for a really long time. It turns out, um, it depends on what you want to focus on.
Well, also, you can undo fast. That's
Yeah,
the thing.
absolutely.
You can ship out the change that breaks absolutely the entire planet, but you can also undo that change equally fast.
Yeah, and if you're comfortable with that, it makes sense. We talked a couple weeks ago on this show about the about how Lyft worked on one of their migrations and how they could move really fast because they had the infrastructure that would hide user errors from people. So it sort of gave you the confidence. If you're culturally comfortable with I broke it and I fixed it, and that took 10 less than 5 minutes, that equally provides that kind of confidence. And I actually, we're laughing about it because it feels a little ridiculous to treat Slack like that, which is now this infrastructure of the world.
Oh my
But
gosh, yes.
but maybe that's fine, actually. Maybe that's why Slack got there in no small part.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that like was a huge part of it. And I think too a huge part of it was like putting a lot of being really thoughtful about who they hired, even though they sent out some form letter rejections that they clearly should not have.
Mostly thoughtful once a human gets involved.
Mostly thoughtful. Um, but I do feel like I was the largest hiring class that they'd had in like ever at that point, which was like maybe 30-ish people. Um,
That's a
yeah,
lot.
in October 2016. Yeah, and it was like there were new people starting almost every week at that point rather than every other week. And it was just like going like mad. Yeah. And I remember turning to the person who was sitting next to me at one point and I was like, oh, hey, Audrey, like, how do I do this thing? And they were like, I started last week, so I have no idea. I was like, cool. Well, hey, nice to meet you.
Great. It is hard to wrap your head around hyper growth, where if you double the company every year, it means that half the people have not been there a year, um, which is a lot. But it that was slower growth than Slack's user growth at that point, I think, as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, which which in no small part was the reason for the test migration.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
let's talk about that.
Yes. So many fires everywhere.
So many fires. So at what point did um my understanding of the test migration was basically we were running MySQL master pairs as the default store for basically everything. And uh if nothing else, you could squint and look at the growth rate of our largest customer and realize that Amazon will not sell Slack a machine big enough by some date. So we had to fix that, if nothing
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
Um, so that was compelling, if nothing else. But there's a bunch of other reasons to do it. At what point did you get involved in this effort?
Pretty early on. So when I was in a product development role at Slack for like 3 months, I want to say something
Oh,
like
sure.
that. So I started on the like core enterprise experience. And enterprise, the product had not shipped yet. Like it was going to GA like 3-ish months after I started. But IBM at the time, the biggest customer, was like data using the enterprise grid, the grid product. And one of the things that I had been hankering to work on at Rent the Runway, but had never really gotten the like leeway to do, was work on performance problems. I always thought those were like really interesting and intriguing. And my onboarding buddy, when I started at Slack, was specifically working on performance problems at the time.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, and so he was sort of like getting me set up, like figuring out how to navigate the code base, etc. And I was like, okay, so like give me some tickets. Like I'm ready to like start doing some stuff, right? And he was like, well, I'm working on these performance tickets. I don't know if you find that interesting. I was like, give me the performance tickets. Like I would like to explain how this works, to understand how this works. And I think I really liked figuring out how a system works through that lens. And so I think it was just like a really good fit for me. And so he gave me some performance tickets and I was like, ooh, this is really fun. I'm enjoying fixing these. And it was like the team actually cared that I was fixing performance
That
tickets.
and that's honestly rare.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it really is. And like it was like, oh no, IBM really needs us to fix this because we're GAing and like it needs to feel and like look legit to a level where like we're not very comfortable right now. Let's give ourselves as much like wiggle room as we can because once GA, they've agreed they're going to start onboarding a lot more people way faster. So we need to fix these now before it literally means like Slack will not load for them when they start logging on like 9 a.m. Eastern. So it was like actually valuable to do this stuff, which is great. So I started working on these things along with whatever product features I was working on at the time. And then GA happened, and maybe like a week later, it was like, yeah, we need like an enterprise performance focused group of people, just like 100% of the time working on enterprise performance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was it? I mean, how did that show up? Was that did IBM's grid not load on that first day of GA, or was this just like forward looking panic?
I mean, as forward looking as like 2 weeks really is forward looking ish. Um, there were there were hints that, well, one, they like told us we're going to start ramping up, and we want to be able to do that, and that's our expectation given that like we signed this contract. And so like, yep, we were expecting a certain amount of they're going to keep growing and we need to be able to sustain that. And then there was also a lot of like fires around, like I don't know how many times, how many hours total in my life I spent looking at percent CPU idle on the database shard that housed IBM's data. Like probably a significant number of hours total. It's like a weird thing to say. but I spent a lot of
Hundreds or thousands
hours.
of database shards at Slack, and
Oh
this is
yeah,
the one that gets the attention.
this is
That's
the
a performance.
one. Yeah, this is the one. And they kept having like stuff happen. Like at one point, and this is after the team was formed, but like it really just like further exemplifies why we needed this team. And we were talking like 4 or 5 engineers. Um, it was like mid-April. So we GA'd end of January. By mid-April, I'm gonna get this wrong, but I think they'd grown by like at least 20% in terms of like daily actives from end of January. They had a channel with, I want to say like 17 to 18,000 users in that channel. And and someone accidentally archived the channel.
Oh no.
Uh-huh. And at the time, if you looked at the one smart thing that the archive code did was it, instead of trying to do it synchronously within the span of a single actual HTTP request, which would not have scaled, obviously, that would have just actually maybe that would have been better because it would have just timed out or out
Yeah,
of memory, and then we wouldn't have had this problem later on. Anyway, I'm just realizing this.
that's a great point, but it didn't do that.
But it didn't do that. No, what it did instead is it enqueued a job, and then the job could have run for however long it wanted to run. I mean, realistically, I think we killed jobs after like 24 hours max, which should have been sooner, to be quite honest. Well, whatever. It enqueued a job, and in that job, in a tight loop, it issued a single delete on the channel membership row for every single one of those users in that channel, which was grand
All
because
18,000 of them.
all 18,000 of them in a tight loop. And this also happened during like around peak login time for users at IBM. And so we were hammering their database shard with 18,000 individual delete requests at the same time that they were trying to do anything in the client. And if you're familiar with like how Slack works, you know that everything hinges on a channel, right? Like messages are in channels, canvases are shared to channels, huddles start in channels. Like everything is about channel membership in the end. Like, do you have access to see this file? Do you have access to see this message? Are you in this channel? Should you get a notification because you're in this channel? Everything is channel membership dependent. It's like how like access permissions and everything works. And so of all the tables, that is the one to not hammer.
Yep.
Because otherwise you're going to slow everything down. And so we sat there mostly helplessly just looking at the CPU idle graph and seeing the number just like go down, 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 down. And you know the like swallowing the goat analogy of like the snake like swallows the goat, slowly digests it? Like that's just what we had to do. We had to swallow the goat. We had to wait for the 18,000 individual delete requests to finish. And then everything recovered and it was fine.
How long did
But
that take?
like maybe an hour or
Oh
two.
no.
Yeah, oh, it was bad. It was very bad. It was not good.
That's yep. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like most of these things, like we never thought before that that was a problem because like one, like no one accidentally, the worst part is then we had to recover that data, all that channel membership data that was hard deleted because it was an accidental archival of a channel.
Right.
Um,
No one wanted this to happen.
Literally no one wanted this to happen. Yeah, it was not good. And but before no one archived big channels like this. And so like why would we have spent, even if we knew that this was gonna like that this was a problem area, that like it was not good to in a for loop like issue individual deletes, even if we knew that, which like we obviously did, it wasn't worth the time and effort to like go fix that until it actually became a problem because there's like 15,000 other things to do. Um, so it was only when we like realized how many of these potential foot shooters. What do we call those?
Foot guns, landmines.
Foot guns. Thank you. Shooters. Who am I? Foot guns. It was only once we'd realized how many foot guns we had that it was like, oh yeah, look, this is a good thing to have this team. And on that team, one of the wildest things was because we were all in person at that time and we were all West Coast, all in the San Francisco office. And so 6 a.m. was when the 9 a.m. IBMers would all sort of log in. And because we had so many of these random fires happening, and because logging in to Slack was in itself like a very database intensive request. You have to fetch, again, the channel membership. It all comes back to the channel membership. You have to fetch all the channel membership for all of these users at basically the same time because everyone started starting their workday at around the same time. And so like you had to we all traded off being butt in chair at the office at 6 a.m. watching the CPU idle graph for IBM
I didn't realize that.
for like several weeks.
Yeah, I guess at some point you get tired very quickly of realizing that you will be woken up at 6 a.m. You might as well just be there at 6 a.m. and have a couple of other people to stare at the problems with you.
Yeah, and it was like, what kind of random shim are we gonna write this morning?
All right,
Spin the wheel.
Wild. I love that. I love that approach to just go run towards the fire. Right, this is gonna happen. We're gonna have to fix it. Let's at least make our lives nice when we go fix the fire. I love that. But this problem no longer exists. What'd you do about it?
Oh gosh, many things in many steps over many years. But so it's incremental. There's like the super long scope of the project, and there was like the shorter scope. Basically, 3 weeks after I started is when they hired the engineer who was tasked with figuring out how to fix MySQL deployment. And he came in and scoped out the test and said, like, this is the thing that we should do. And so he was working on that at the same time that we on the enterprise performance team were like fighting fires and essentially trying to give ourselves enough breathing room to be able to like tackle the like more fundamental performance problems across the board. But we couldn't do that until like we didn't have to be butt in seat at 6 a.m. anymore, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we needed to fix in that first section to give us that breathing room was to change how we were storing channel membership. At first, we started just doing a couple of like different queries to sort of optimize how we were doing like mentions counts, like badging, figuring out what we need to badge and whatnot. Because again, that is dependent on channel membership.
Of course.
Everything is. So we figured out a couple of tweaks that we could do there to calculate mentions in a way that was a little bit better. But what we quickly realized is that there was only so much we could do to make those queries better because they were on distinct tables. So fun fact, back in the day, channel membership was on 3 different tables.
Go on.
So private channel membership and group DM membership was on the same table. Public channel membership was on one table, and DM membership was on a completely different table.
Right. Okay.
Yes. Which like sort of made sense when you think about the like product implications.
Yeah.
And so like not a wild idea that we were in that state. What was wild, though, is that on boot, when all these clients need to load up this information, what information do you need?
All of it.
Exactly. You need all of your channel membership. You need your DMs, you need your private channels, you need your group DMs, and you need your public channels. And so what does that turn into? That turns into a really lovely union all query that ends up hitting 3 different tables. And it ends up doing that for every single user who's logging in at the same time, which is super fun because we were doing that in MySQL. So had we been doing like 3 individual requests out to MySQL, say like get the public channel membership, get the DM membership, get the private channel membership, and been smarter about ordering that, maybe. But we determined that the fastest way to get that information was to offload all of it to MySQL and do the union there and then get that information back.
Yeah, that
Which,
makes
like,
sense.
yeah, we like instrumented it or whatever. We figured it out that like that was actually the most efficient thing. But we needed that to be more efficient. And so essentially what it turned into was this initial project, which like they had no, like they, like management, had no business giving me this project. Like I was a 2 years out of college. Like I had never written a line of SQL before I showed up to Slack, like 6 months prior. Never in my life. I'd never written a line of PHP before I showed up 6 months prior. Like I had no business doing this project.
And yet you were the one.
And yet I think we had this many problems and this many people to solve it. And that's where I'm going back to like, I think they just figured out really who they needed to hire. Like Slack was really good at hiring really good people and knowing how to put them in situations where they would like shine and grow and like figure it out. And like there's a lot of trust. And maybe it didn't pan out every single time, but most of the time I feel like it really like catapulted a lot of particularly junior people who started there because we were given these projects that like were insane to give to like junior people. But in a lot of cases, like had other folks around us to like review pull requests, like help jump into incidents when like inevitably something bad happened, right? Like it was a very like we're all in this together mentality, which I think like also helped. Like it doesn't help to like put a junior person into a fire and be like, good luck, have fun. If you're not gonna like also like be there to like pour some water over
Yeah.
every so
Yeah,
often.
absolutely. It's important to give junior people real problems to work on. Like that's the only way
Yes.
you learn and grow. It's the way you keep people engaged. We're all in this to do things that matter. Just because you're junior doesn't mean you shouldn't work on things that matter. Uh, but yeah, you need that support, or you're just gonna straight into the deep end with bricks around your feet.
Yeah, no good. Don't want that. And that's how you burn everyone out. And then you have no more junior people. And then good luck to you. So the first thing we did was we created a new table. We called it channels members. And we combined the data from groups members, which was the private stuff, and teams channels members. Don't ask me about the naming scheme. We'd like mistakes were made. Um, so joined that data onto a new table. And that eased a lot of things. Turns out it made a lot of queries a lot better.
Interesting. That's not actually obvious to me, like a priori. But yeah, it makes sense that it's simpler, but maybe I just
It's
have bad SQL
simpler,
intuition.
but there were so many places that we were doing checks across both things. And not necessarily places where we're doing checks where we were like offloading all of it to MySQL. The places where we were doing it in the code, like in file permissions checks, we were doing like an initial check to see if you had access to the file because it was in a public channel. And then we were doing a check, I don't know in what order, but I think in that order, we were doing a check to see if you had access to the file because it was in a private channel that you were in. Or then we're doing the check finally, like, is it in a DM you're in? I don't know. Like, let's just try to find access for this file for you. And we were doing that individually a bunch of times, and we could simplify that to just 2 checks until we eventually migrated the DM's membership to also be in that table. Um, and then it was just 1 check. Like, is this file shared in any of, like, what channels are you in? Give me that result. Is it shared in any of the, is the file shared in any of the channels that you are in? Done. Like, you don't have to do that check a bunch of times. And so it like, because it offloaded a bunch of work from the database, we weren't doing more of these checks. It ended up like reducing a lot of giving us more wiggle room, essentially. Like,
Yeah, that
yeah.
makes that
Does that
makes a
make
lot of
sense?
sense, and it's sort of going back to what you said about libchat, that it is, even at 5 or 6 thousand lines, like the simplicity of like we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this is fine as long as you can find it. You can explore the code, you can find what you need to find, but at some point there will be a scale, and maybe maybe whatever company you're working at doesn't hit it, Slack clearly did, where the conceptual simplicity of no, we put it all in one place, and then the access patterns and the number of things that we could possibly ever think about just becomes much, much smaller. And it's suddenly worthwhile to swallow that goat and say, like, we're gonna put everything in one table and just make it happen.
Yeah. So another hurdle that I completely glossed over that we had to deal with to do this is that at the time there was just like raw SQL everywhere. It was like everywhere.
I've talked to a lot of people about this. How do you feel about that? Was that the right choice?
I mean, hindsight's 2020. Yeah. I mean, like,
Valid.
look, Slack is what it is today. Yeah.
I buy that. And it's nice and simple too. It did work, so it was fine.
It worked. So yes, it was the right decision. Could other decisions have also been the right decision? Possibly. I think that's valid. But I think it did not hinder product development in enough to slow down. So I think yes.
Then it didn't matter. Then it was a fine decision.
Didn't matter.
One of possibly many fine decisions.
Yeah. It's just because that's also all we have to do, right? Is just like make enough right decisions over and over again, but you don't know if they're right.
Yeah.
Whatever point
it makes a lot of sense. It makes a ton of sense. We talk on the show a lot about the idea of like, this is a show about doing migrations, but many times the right decision is to simply not do a migration. Like, don't do work you don't have to do.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah, and I think up until that point, like Burning Fire, IBM, biggest customer, giving us lots of money, trusting us to be their collaboration hub. Oh, that was the word we were using at the time, right? I don't know if Slack still uses
that was brief.
Right? Yeah. Was that like pre-IPO? Maybe something like that. Anyway, the collaboration hub, right? We were their collaboration hub. They were trusting us, so we like had to deliver, and like the way to give them the ability to grow. This was one of many projects, obviously, but like was to just simplify the data model, make sure that like we had fewer times that we had to like run these checks over and over again. And the only way to do that was to find all of the raw SQL in the code that hit either of those two tables, the table with the public membership information and the table with the private membership information. Because how else do you want to consolidate that data other than like go through every single individual call site, like grep for like select blah from groups members across the entire code base, find all of those, okay, then like rewrite, like throw in a little feature flag if statement in there, and then like that is how you end up burned over and over and over again. So one of the things that I ended up doing was extracting all of those SQL calls, essentially just wrapping them in individual functions in another file. And so I just like extracted away the SQL by one level because ORMs were like not what I was tasked with doing. That was not the problem that I was meant to solve. Like that had nothing to do with like just join the tables. Like that was just like do that and do it yesterday, right? Like I was not going to solve Slack's ORM problem that summer. Definitely not as like a 1 year out of college grad.
I mean, some might argue that's the ideal time in your career to overbuild an ORM.
Yeah, fair enough.
I'm pretty sure I did that like 2 years into my career. Like I built a lot of ORM looking stuff.
Oh yeah, because like encapsulation and like all the things you learned about like proper ways to do things. Yeah, I was not going to do that. So it was just this call. Oh, the exact same function, the exact same SQL query is being made over here. Okay, cool. Just replace with function call. Function call contains copy paste the SQL query. Like that was all I was doing. And then all of my feature flags were in that file. And I was able to just like turn one off, turn one on, see what happened, make sure that it was all clear. Obviously, there was a whole like backfill all the data, make sure that we double write, because you need the data in the new membership table that you're going to point all the stuff to to be correct and match the data that is encapsulated both in the public channel data and in the private channel data. Um, at one point in this whole migration, I accidentally, no one noticed this, but this one guy that I was working with, on Thursdays at the time, we had like gather hours where like there was like appetizer-y food at the office and most people hung out. Yeah. And I decided that was a good time to do a test run of having Slack read from the new membership table. Um, and for that time, I accidentally ran the wrong script. And I kicked everyone at Slack out of all of their channels.
So instead of doing karaoke, I guess in addition to doing karaoke at 4 p.m., they also did not have access to Slack. Effectively.
Yeah, effectively. And thankfully, I just flipped the flag back to read from the old tables. And so no one noticed apart from this one guy that I heard. He was like, weird, my sidebar just kind of flashed. I was like, nothing happened.
Don't worry about it. I'm gonna repopulate that table later. I love that. And I love that. So I want to take a brief detour into tools, because you mentioned like 4 or 5 things there that you were looking at. You've talked about looking at the idle state on idle CPU on the IBM shard, and looking at actual table membership, looking at feature flags, and there's just this pile of information you need in order to do this work. What's critical for you? Like, how do you think about assembling like your little tool stack to do this work?
But for this type of thing where it's like channel membership is the crux of everything, like it needs to show the source of truth as humanly live as possible, computerly wise, because we're computer speed, not human speed.
Yeah.
And so like I need to be able to ascertain that like if this person is not in this channel and they should be, like I need to see that like immediately, because I don't want to wait for that person to find out that suddenly something is weird with their channel membership and then like have them right into CE and then like get a Zendesk ticket. And then like I do like the whole flow of like, oh, well, let me make sure that this person's in this channel that they're supposed to be in, like what happened. And so like getting that information live is so crucial to making sure that you're doing it well. Dry runs, whenever the output of like, I'm about to run the script, it will do this potentially destructive thing. Show me, like in big bold letters, what it is about to do. It's sort of like when you go to like delete a repo in GitHub, right? And it's like, please type the repo name. And you're like, ugh, this again, right? But it's like, no, like you'll want to make sure that you're deleting the repo if you're deleting the repo that you want to delete, because it is pretty darn destructive. And having been on the other side of like customers accidentally deleting a bunch of Slack data, and having to recover that, like no one wants to recover that, and it's like a bad time for everyone else. So like knowing exactly the potential outcome of the potentially destructive thing that you're going to do is pretty crucial, and knowing like what state, like feature flags, like what is flipped, what is not, like what of the traffic that's flowing in, what's in what treatment, what's in what flag, but all that stuff. And at all the different stages, right? Like, so I ran it for just Slack. And so like, I needed to make sure that like, and obviously at that point, this was just like PHP array blob in a really long file. Again, just long files. It's like a blob. And it was like, this is the flag that I'm working on, and like of the teams enabled, it is Slack, right? And like, but that was kind of annoying to have to read and parse in a text file and in a big long PHP array blob. So I have that on I have like a shortcut that I wrote, like pointing to that line.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, absolutely. That makes a ton of sense.
I just needed to make sure that sometimes you just read things wrong too, and you're like, no, I need to make sure that like I actually read this right, and this is actually enabled for these people. Yeah, Grafana was great for looking at all the stuff.
It's really interesting that most of the stuff you're talking about is production data. It makes sense, right? That's the scary place to delete data. That's the scary place when performance goes sideways. The performance of my local machine does not matter to anybody.
No one cares.
No one cares. It's probably fine too. It's got like 3 users. So yeah, it's like it's all this production data. I wonder, one of the things that when I was thinking about starting this company last year and talking with people about like what they cared about, one of the strands of thought that came out of a ton of people, not everyone, like by a long shot, was product engineers do not want to care about production, and they perceive that in many cases caring about production slows them down because production contains the code that they're not writing right now. I'm curious what your reaction to that is.
Oh man. Yeah. Well, okay. So this is where I'm going to say the spicy thing, but that I have come to believe more and more strongly over the last several years. And especially in light of what I spent my last 4 years at Slack doing, which was unapologetically load testing in production. Because I think production is actually the only environment that matters. Well, of the environments that matter, it is the one that matters the most.
I can get behind that.
And like all of your testing pre-production is never going to be sufficient. And like I will die on that hill. Like I'm ready to, like, people can at me, like I and I actually got recently sort of not into it, like a discussion at work about testing in production. And obviously a lot of people are like freaked out by it because you're potentially impacting real customer data. But because the stakes are so much higher, people tend to take it a lot more seriously and think much more critically about actual bottlenecks and when they're going to run into them. So like, for example, and I did this a couple times where I was like, hey, I have this thing that I wrote, this tool that creates a bunch of fake Slack users, and I'm going to boot a bunch of them up at this time on this day. And I anticipate about this much traffic, which is like maybe like 10 to 15% over what we've ever experienced. Just letting you know, infra teams, that this is a thing that I'm going to do. I'm going to be monitoring graphs. Here are the graphs that I'm going to be monitoring, and I will turn it off if I see anything go above like these red lines. And like, please verify that the red lines make sense for your systems, because like I'm not an expert in Memcache, whatever, like all these things, right? Like I am not an expert. I'm more of a breadthy person. So like, make sure that these red lines are correct. I pulled them from your own graphs, so they better darn be good. And we will see what happens. And that lit fires under people's butts. And but I think a lot of people were also very curious to see what would happen. Like, where are the bottlenecks, right? Like, we don't know.
Yeah.
Let's find out.
Definitionally.
Yes, literally. Like, you can't spin up a like staging environment that like looks like production and attempt to do something that looks like production in staging and expect to hit the same bottlenecks. Like, how are we going to know that like console will stop generating a file that has all of the services to tell you about after a certain number of services, right? Like, once you've scaled up and you have so many like VT gates or whatever, that like suddenly it stops being able to generate the file. And then you have no VT gates because for some reason, instead of just cutting it off, it just generates nothing. And then you have nothing that you're pointing to anymore. These types of things. Like, you can't really know that this is a true bottleneck in anything but production.
Yeah. That makes sense. That makes a ton of sense, especially if you're focused on performance problems. You're never going to see it. And
never ever.
You're going to see these things all over the product org, right? That of any organization with any reasonable scale, you don't get to ignore performance problems. because your feature may or may not scale depending on what your code looks like.
Yeah, and when you get to a certain size too, like and complexity of architecture, it's like prohibitively expensive to create an entirely like copy paste version of your architecture in a like test only environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you start getting into these conversations about like, well, like was this system truly isolated during this test, and like what state was it in, where was this flag enabled on this environment at this time, like this subsystem, like, oh well, it was undergoing a migration at that point, which was not happening elsewhere for some reason, because it's being like everyone's going to end up testing their stuff in the test environment.
Mm-hmm.
So like the conflation of all of the potential, like the factorial space that is like this feature flag enabled, this feature flag enabled, this version of Python, this version of blah blah blah, like it just ends up completely out of control. And so like anything you ascertain in the testing environment, because they're so expensive to spin up, won't map to production. And then you're just going to be frustrated that you spent all this money and time on building this test environment that was supposed to tell you when stuff was going to break in production, but it doesn't because everyone's actually using it to test stuff. And then you're going to be like, why did I spend so much money on a test environment when it didn't actually stop these problems from hitting production?
That makes, if I love that. I love your point about the test environment to succeed needs to tell you what's going to happen in production. And if it doesn't, it has failed. And if it doesn't look like production, it has failed. And it doesn't look like production. It just doesn't. It never will.
It never will. It never will. Unless your system has an architecture such that it's like you can like copy paste the entire thing and you're deploying it to like entire subsystems. Like you have exactly the exact architecture of all the pieces that you potentially need in like IAD, and then you have exactly the same thing in whatever the code for one of the US West things is, right? Like, I don't know. IAD is the one everyone knows, right? If Virginia goes down, we're all screwed. Like nothing will work for anyone. But that's rare. And even those will have some unifying communication point, right? Like, how are you deploying to these things? Because I'm willing to bet you're deploying to those things from the same unified source.
Yeah. Presumably, you
That's
don't
part of
have deploying
production.
systems in both production and dev or staging.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I'm convinced. I might have come convinced already, but
Yeah. So that's my take on testing production. I think we should do more of it. And I think it also leads to like building solutions that are immediately useful in production. So think about like circuit breaking, right? Like you want to have a system whereby you are detecting that there's like too much load going to a certain, going back to some of the test stuff we talked about, like a certain VT shard. And so like and the ability to create back pressure that then feeds back into whatever testing system that's exerting that pressure is really important. Telling it to just shut off. Some of the load test tooling that we built to Slack was the first that we turned off, obviously, when we were detecting any sort of pressure on any of the databases. And one of the ways that we tested that the circuit breaking worked was create a bunch of pressure using the load test tooling. And we made sure that that worked in dev, obviously. But then in production, we were able to actually simulate that. And now like the rest of the entire like Slack architecture benefits from having this like really good circuit breaking infrastructure. And so like by protecting yourself from the testing, you are building a solution that helps the entire system. And I would argue that's most of the outcomes that you'll get from testing in production is building solutions that will actually help the health and reliability and availability of your entire system.
that makes a lot of sense. There's a certain amount of the system is the system is the system. The system is not the code. The system is not the AWS bill. It is the system. It is the combination of all of those things in a unique way. And things like circuit breaking only make sense if you can run them. You can't run circuit breaking in dev in a meaningful way.
Yeah. And that's the
All
stuff
right.
that saves your butt.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I like the broadening of the sort of software engineering role to it is not about writing code. It is about maintaining the system that lives in production, which I think most people would agree with. Like,
I think that's where
okay,
customers are. Like,
yeah,
this is
the goal
people
is
who
not to
are
write
paying
code
you
and like
money.
walk away and get lunch. The goal is to go give things to customers. That's what the job is. And part of that job lives off your laptop. Yep. Um, I would come back and just make sure that we hit the coda of the story. So, um, bunch of there's a bunch of fires to put out, a bunch of simplification. You got to the point where you were actually you'd refactored everything into a relatively coherent set of functions and a smaller set of accesses and reads and writes to the new channel membership table itself. Um, how did the actual, if we're going to talk about production, how did the actual production rollout go? Like what surprises did you see as you were actually turning this on for customers, if any?
Um, I mean, there was a time that I accidentally deleted everyone in Slack's membership. That was a fun one.
They're not
Um,
customers though. They're
yeah,
paid to
yeah,
work there.
okay, fair enough. Um, well, good surprise.
Love good
Um,
surprises.
good surprise. So, like, a couple months after a couple months after like we were fully reading from we were doing comparison checks, like sampling comparison checks at some point of like seeing like, oh, for I forgot what percentage we did, probably like under 1%. We were checking like the data that we're fetching looks like the data in the old tables. I think we did that for about 2 weeks and then we turned that off and we saw that like by and large the data on the new table was good. um we think there were a couple instances where um we weren't updating the his channel membership also still stores, as far as I'm concerned, your last read timestamp for the channel that you are a member of, because that's unique to everyone who's in the channel, obviously, and so it makes sense to store that on that row. And I think there was like a couple places in the code that like my grep hadn't caught the path that ends up updating that, which became really clear really fast when we tested it internally mostly. But there was like one case where it only happened in like enterprise grid setup where it's like a little bit more complicated. And Slack wasn't an enterprise grid user. And there were very few of us, even if we were working on grid, like using grid in the way that it ended up going itself in production. But it ended up being just like 2-line change. And it was like very quick to spot and just like, okay, cool, ship this out, deploy button, 100% of production in 30 seconds. Um,
See, it's a good decision if you're all aligned around it.
yeah. What ended up being the biggest win out of this migration, though, was I think a couple months after we'd stopped reading from any of the old tables, we'd cleared out all that data. There was a customer that was going from one IDP to another. And in that process, ended up accidentally issuing delete requests for 30,000 users. Uh, yeah. And at the time, Slack really just liked like straight up deleting stuff out of databases rather than like adding a date delete field with like a timestamp. It was just like delete, bye. And it's like it's on the backup for 7 days and like otherwise like good luck to you.
I know how painful it is to get data off those backups. I worked with that team.
Yeah, it is rough. Um Actually, Vitesse made that harder in some ways too. But in this case, Yeah, so it ended up issuing a delete request for every single channel membership row associated with every single one of those 30,000 users, because that's what you do when you clean up a user. You also delete all of their channel membership. And of course, this happened as on the day of the company picnic. So, like, very few of us are at our machines, which also happened to be my husband's birthday. And I was the channel membership expert. And so it was me to recover, like, create a script that ran from the backups and recover all those channel memberships. But a week later, I turned around, and because I had unified all of the queries that hit the channel membership table in one file, I was able to add a date delete column and find all the requisite queries that were deletes and instead turn them into update date delete column. And we never had to recover channel membership from a backup in that way ever again.
That's amazing. I love it.
It was great. It was so satisfying.
Yeah, that is deeply satisfying. I love that. All right.
It was fabulous.
That's how it is. All right. We're getting close to the end. So two final questions. What advice would you have for people who are embarking on some of these bigger refactors, bigger migrations?
Read my book. No.
Absolutely.
The reason I have it here is because I was reminding myself about some of the test stuff, which we actually didn't touch about at all. But the more complete story from today is, I think, chapter 11 or something. There's like 2 case studies in this, and like one of them is this piece.
Fantastic. For those people who are listening, that's Refactoring at Scale, and we will drop a link in the description.
Oh, thank you. That's very nice.
Of course.
I think 2 biggest things. Over communication, like more communication. Number 1 is more communication than you think you actually need. And that sounds really annoying, especially for like the types of engineers who like doing this type of work, which is sort of like backgroundy work, and like we're not talking about like flashy new like front end button that like everyone's so excited because like do people tweet about product releases anymore?
Sometimes,
what's
yeah.
the verb for that anyway? Anyway, whatever. I don't know. We're in the weirdest timeline, I have decided. And yeah, so I think over communication is really, really key, because you're going to end up touching something that someone else didn't expect you to touch, where inevitably, like, even if it's like what you think is the smallest migration possible, like, cast a way bigger net of the people that you are telling about. Go like evangelize the thing that you are doing as much as humanly possible, because inevitably something's going to happen. Like a bug will arise for sure. That's like guaranteed. But maybe that's like number 2. Like, know today before you even start that there will be at least one bug.
Yeah.
Like, you won't get them all. This is not Pokemon. Like, you won't get them all. You will miss something. So like, get the anxiety out of your body now that like you're gonna screw up. Like, you will screw up. Like, there will be a screw up at some point, maybe even 2 or 3 or 4. Ideally they're not big, but you have fewer chances of making a major screw up if you do number 1, which is over communicate as much as humanly possible. And obviously that differs, like, depending on what kind of company you work at, like how you do like project updates, et cetera, whether you do it in Slack, whether you do it somewhere else, I don't know, whatever. But like, figure out and work with it. Maybe it's not your manager's expertise in like over communicating projects like this. Like, this is a very different kind of project to over communicate than it is like a big feature launch. Those have like traditionally like PMs behind them. And like, I mean, I know you PM'd an info team, but like they have like a lot more um processes usually already in place. Like more eyes are on those feature releases already to begin with. The migration stuff is the stuff that like no one wants to hear about and like is just like happening in the background. That's like kind of the worst. You want everyone to know about this migration that you are embarking on, and you want to be annoying about it. And if you talk to someone and they don't know that you are migrating from Python whatever to Python whatever else, like you want them to know that when you're entering their DMs, they're like, oh, this is the person who's migrating Python to Python whatever. Like you want them to have that reaction because you have over communicated that so much. Then you get less burned
And
on the
then
other
and then
side
you can
when
make
like
mistakes.
eventually and then you can make mistakes and people will know like, oh, like you won't be in an incident for 3 hours being like, what is going on? It's like within maybe half an hour you'll be like, oh, this is probably related to that migration that like Alice has told me 15,000 times about. It's like, yes it is, right? You'll
Yeah.
know much sooner because those are the kinds of bugs that like usually take way longer to solve than the feature bugs. And yeah, and wrapping up on the thread that I was starting earlier, your manager might not be the best person to understand the communication plan behind a migration, is this unless they have that experience. And so I would find a person who is really good about doing that kind of communication. If that does not exist, your job, learn to be that person. There's like a whole section in here about how to be annoying about your
I hope that's a chapter name.
it's not, but I really should have named it that.
It's like inversion.
Version, yeah, in second edition. Um, but there's a whole chapter 7, communication. So you can learn to be that person who's annoying about the migration.
I love it. I mean that tracks. I think that makes a ton of sense. And it is so often under communicated when you're doing something that feels technical or that is not like there's a machine that produces the noise for feature launches, and there is not that same machine. And if you're an engineer, you got to figure out how to do it.
Yeah. And a lot of the times it's about being creative in how you can land. Hate saying this, but like there's no better word for it right now in my head. Like shift left, just shift all the way. You can't get further left. So like if you have the ability and the time and the energy or whatever, maybe Tern does this. I know we talked about this, I believe, at some point last summer.
I promised myself we're not going to do a product pitch in this, but yeah, absolutely. This is hyper aligned with the way we're thinking about what Turn will do.
Sub it in VS Code. Like if the line you are editing as an engineer is undergoing some kind of related migratory, that's the word. We got there. I'm gonna blame ESL. Migratory change. The file, whatever it is, just be where the people are. And then you can blame VS Code for being annoying about warning folks about your migration, rather than yourself.
Absolutely. Make it if we can all hate the tool instead of hate
Yes.
the problem or each other, then that's great. I mean, it's a problem for the vendor, but that's a vendor problem, and who cares?
Then we've solved all problems. Hate the tool, not the people.
Exactly. All right, and last question: where can people find you on the internet if they have more questions?
Ooh, I this is going to be dangerous what I'm going to say, but we'll see. I mostly respond to LinkedIn messages every so often. So I have a LinkedIn profile. It's my name. But also modethecodetoad.com is my website
Awesome.
because it rhymes.
We'll put links to both of those in the description. All
Yeah.
right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, TR. This was super fun.
Suppose.